governments. We should have learned our lesson from Iraq, and we certainly should have learned our lesson from Libya, where Obama and Cameroon and the French went in and carried out this R2P overthrow of Gaddafi, which has caused a living hell for the Sahel region of Africa. So we don't want to overthrow a government, but that's what Saudi Arabia is supporting al-Qaeda and these insurgents to do. And I think the United States should make very clear that we're not going to work with the people who bombed our own country in 2011 to overthrow another government. So the Congress and the American people made that very clear a few weeks ago, and we avoided the immediate danger of war, which could spread to a general war with Russia and China. But now we have to stick to the policy of Syrians negotiating a solution to their own country without the imposition of foreign powers from the United States to Saudi Arabia to Turkey to Qatar. And that would be a next important step to take.
You raised a very good point. Lawrence Corp, why is Saudi Arabia angry? Don't they have the shared interests as the U.S. has in terms of what their shared interest ultimately is, and that's for Assad to leave power, which is basically amounting to regime change. Susan Rice came out and said that in the interview, I think it was on GPS with the host, of which she said that, the White House has been and is seeking regime change. So why would Saudi Arabia be angry at the United States?
Well, I think the United States basically wants the Syrian people, like the people in Tunisia and the people in Egypt, to make their own choice. Remember that this started as a peaceful demonstration by the majority of the people in Syria against the Assad government, which then cracked down on them mercilessly. The younger Assad, just like his father did in Homs years ago. And then countries in the region began to help the people who were being slaughtered by the Assad government. And so therefore, the people who are concerned that as a result of what may happen here, that the Assad government would stay in power. The United States, if they read President Obama's speech to the UN, he was very careful. We're not going to go in and interfere in people's civil wars anymore. Basically, the whole reason the United States got involved was because of a violation of a treaty that the majority of the world has signed, including Syria.
Well, here's where the situation gets very confusing, Lawrence Freeman. I can't figure it out. I'm sure a lot of people can't. Perhaps you can tell us what is going on, and that has to deal with this infighting that has reached epic proportions. Now, it was just last week where you had those 13 groups who broke away from the Free Syrian Army, and they're joining this extreme Al-Qaeda terrorists, if you want to call them, or insurgents. Now, the question is that where does that leave the FSA? Where does that leave the opposition, the so-called Syrian National Coalition, if it doesn't have control of the FSA? And then ultimately then, who's controlling these groups? Is Saudi Arabia in control of all of these groups or partially?
Well, first of all, the Free Syrian Army right now is in disarray and is collapsing. You not only have this infighting that you've talked about, but what has not been significantly reported on is that 6 weeks ago, a delegation of people from the Syrian Free Army met with assistants to President Assad and discussed 5 or 6 key points to actually resolve the conflict internally. If these people who represent various militias in the Free Syrian Army were to go back and desert the Free Syrian Army and rejoin again with the government of Assad, then even more territory inside Syria would fall to the government. So the army and the coalition, because they have no real positive agenda, they have a Muslim Brotherhood al-Qaeda agenda. And if these people were to take over the country, it'd be far worse than what we're seeing now. They have been supported by the United States. The United States is working in CIA and others in training people in the army with money from Saudi Arabia and help from Turkey and other countries. And there's only one purpose, and it is regime change. And Obama made very clear in his speech to the United Nations that the so-called responsibility to protect and liberal hawk intervention on so-called humanitarian concerns is a valid principle. So we in the West, led by people like President Obama and others, can decide in advance that we have a right to get rid of a leader of another country. And that's what's causing the problem. Because of the defections in the army, and even over to Assad potentially, the army is in disarray. It can't fight. It's losing ground. And therefore, you're going to see more internal squabbling. And I think that the Russians and others in the area are trying to look for some kind of solution to the process. And Kerry has been forced to go along with it, which I think is a good thing. So I think the situation is tilting right now against the Syrian Free Army and the opposition in favor of the government.
And based on that, Lawrence Korb, if you agree with Lawrence Freeman, I would think it's the best time for Geneva II to take place. But at the same time, you're having SNC, who has said that, well, they've set the precondition again, that based on a quote, all parties must agree that the purpose of the conference, Geneva II, will be establishment of a transitional government with Assad to play no role in a transitional authority. First of all, are they, aside from the fact that they may not be the official representation of the Syrian people, are they in any position to set any preconditions? Lawrence Korb.
Well, I think that basically, and Secretary Kerry has been very clear about this, working with his Russian counterparts, that basically this has to be a negotiated settlement. Assad can't lose, but he can't win either. And as has been pointed out, there is disarray among the opposition groups because many of them are frustrated. They didn't get enough aid from outside powers, so they turn to groups like al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda offshoot. So I think basically you need a negotiated settlement, and the negotiated settlement is going to have to involve Russia, the United States. Iran's going to have to be involved, and I think as a result of the outreach of President Rouhani and the dealing with President Obama, they'll be able to work this out in addition to the other things that they are dealing with. But in the end, in a transitional government where the people are allowed to voice their opinion, Assad will not stay. The only way he can stay is by using force.
Lawrence Freeman, don't you think Iran should be part of the solution in terms of at least the conference, if not consultations, which I'm sure has taken place? After all, we had the foreign minister talk to Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon has come out and say Iran needs to be part of this solution in terms of at least the Geneva II conference.
No question about it. I think my colleague on the other end agrees as well. I mean, Iran has to be part of a solution to all problems in this area of the world. They're not going to be worked out without Iran. What has to be also brought in, which is so far not discussed, is the ideas that were discussed at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization a few weeks ago, led by the new president of China, Xi, which is that we have to create a zone of economic development. I mean, he talked about a Silk Road from Pacific to the Baltic Sea, where we actually have industry, you have manufacturing, you have electricity, you have transportation, so that we actually bring economic development to this region of the world, which is the sine qua non for future stability, as it is throughout all Northern Africa. And this also has to be part of an agenda led by Senator Kerry, Assistant Secretary of State Kerry, and Lavrov, and Iran, and other principal parties in the region. But you cannot start with a demand that the president has to go as a precondition. You have to leave that up to the Syrian people, and you can't decide that in advance from outside the country. And as long as President Obama and the National Security Advisor Susan Rice and Samantha Powers insist on that, they are causing more harm and not helping the process. So hopefully they'll drop that and allow Secretary of State Kerry to proceed.
Very well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. From the Executive Intelligence Review, Lawrence Freeman talking to us from Washington. From the Center for American Progress, Lawrence Korb spoke to us also from Washington. And thank you for watching another edition of The Debate. From Mika Bataglia and the entire team here in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.